Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Cayenne Harris, Vice President of Education and Community Engagement at UMS. I'd really like to thank you for joining us for what I'm sure is going to be a great discussion tonight. You're probably here, or I hope you're here, because you've already viewed the UMS digital presentation, Sphinx Virtuosi, This is America, which premiered on January 29th. If you haven't seen it yet, or if you'd like to experience it again, there's still time, but not too much. It will be available on the UMS website until midnight tonight. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for the digital presentation, the Helmut F. and Candace J. Stern Endowment Fund, and the University of Michigan Credit Union as part of its Arts Adventures initiative. So we're very fortunate to have with us this evening three wonderful artists who were featured in the Sphinx Virtuosi presentation: Gabriel Cabezas, Bill Neri, and Melissa White. And we're so thankful that they are here with us this evening, and they're in different parts of the country. So thank you all so much for being here tonight with us.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. Thanks for having us.
So over the next hour, we're going to have an informal discussion. And for anyone who's watching at home, we'd love for you to participate as well. So if you have a question, please feel free to share it in the chat, and we'll be monitoring the chat to ensure that our guests receive your questions and can respond to as many as possible, time permitting. So I just want to start by thanking the Sphinx organization. It's important for me to note that UMS and Sphinx have a long history of partnership and collaboration, and it's something we're really proud of at UMS. And so for our guests, I'd love to hear from each of you briefly about how you got involved with the Sphinx organization and how did you eventually become a member of Sphinx Virtuosi. Melissa, would you like to begin?
Sure, I'll start. So, hi everyone. I actually competed in the inaugural Sphinx competition, which was way back in 1998. So I've been affiliated with Sphinx since it first started. I grew up in Lansing, Michigan, and I was studying with teachers who had gotten the flyer about this first competition, and so they let me know that it was happening, and I went and gave it a shot. And so that very first year, there was just one division. We all competed together, and it was an exciting experience. It was really fun. It had a familial vibe, and I think ever since then we've coined the Sphinx community as a family, and we say La Familia. And so I competed that year, and then I won the first prize in junior division in 2001. So the thing about competing in Sphinx is that it's not just the competition that happens. You continue to be a part of learning, and it really is such a fun time that we stay in touch with each other as friends. So actually, it's really nice to see Bill and Gabe here. This is fun. And so, yeah, then when Sphinx Virtuosi began, I don't remember the first year, I was a part of the group then, and I was able to continue on and do some tours. So it was fun to be a part of this year's, even though it was virtual.
Great. Bill, you want to tell us your journey with Sphinx?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having us. Really happy to be here. My journey with Sphinx began maybe not too much earlier or later than Melissa's, because my first time with Sphinx was as a student at SPA, the Sphinx Performance Academy, when I was in middle school, and Melissa was on the faculty there. So she was teaching me back then, and a couple of years went by. I didn't do the competition, and I was really focused on wanting an orchestral focused career. And as Sphinx grew in size, their programming grew as well, and they eventually incorporated a lot of orchestral focused work. and they eventually had this orchestra audition experience at the Sphinx convening in Detroit one year called SOPA, the Sphinx Orchestral Partners Audition, and I participated in that, and I think that's how I became, I got on the Sphinx radar, and they needed a violist for one of their tours, and I signed up, and I've been playing with them ever since. And also from that, I grew into later becoming into the role of the project manager for that same program, the National Alliance for Audition Support. So I serve sort of two roles, both as a performer and as an administrator for the National Alliance for Audition Support. So that's a bit of my journey.
That's great. Gabe?
Yeah, I first got involved with Sphinx through the competition, and I think my first year was 2006. That sounds right to me. And that was actually around the time I think that Sphinx Virtuosi was starting to play. So I remember playing, I think in 2007 at a gala at Carnegie Hall, and Melissa was playing the national anthem and playing in the orchestra with us. So that was a lot of fun. Like Melissa said, the family, we all go back a long time, and I've been lucky enough to play with the Virtuosi since I was in high school and a little in college and after, here and there.
That's great. Thank you so much. So the discussion of diversity in the arts and the classical music world has been around actually for a long time, as long as I've been in the industry. But 2020 has brought a kind of larger reckoning in the United States. And of course, those calls for change in the classical music world are becoming louder as well and more visible. And I wonder if any of you would be willing to speak to changes that you're seeing in the classical music world and signs that you think potentially it's getting healthier.
Wow, I'll jump in. So I would start by saying, I think it was eye-opening even for myself when Sphinx first began way back in 1998, because the classical music world is one that, from appearance, lacks diversity, it seems. You go to a concert and you see many faces, and they're mostly white or Asian, a lot of males. And so when Sphinx first happened and we came together and I saw there were this many Black and brown people doing what I do and what I love and sharing this passion, my mind was blown. I got so excited. And that was just in 98. And now here we are in 2021. I almost said 2020. But when we go year after year to the Sphinx competition and they now have the conference, you see this huge event happening that's just completely diverse. And so it's exciting to see that people, first of all, are starting to know that we exist. There are lots of us. When I say us, I mean Black and brown players, Black and brown composers, conductors, singers. Like we are here. And it's nice now to see that we're also starting to be given stage time and be programmed in terms of our music. And so I've always felt like Sphinx has tried to pioneer giving us a time to shine, let's say, and developing ways for us to perform and have our music out there. And it's nice now to see programs popping up, and we see our friends that are now in the program, and it has nothing to do with Sphinx at all, or it's not associated, let's say, with the Sphinx program. It's just they're starting to, I think presenters are starting to feel like they do have a responsibility to broaden their programming and to start to present diversity. And so that's exciting to see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think audiences are also really hungry to see more diversity on stage. It's been a pretty striking change. And I think Sphinx has been a huge part of making some of that change possible. The 2020 and 2021 have been a really challenging time for the arts in general. And I wanted to ask you all a little bit about a good portion of the Sphinx Virtuosi This Is America presentation, which was filmed in what is called a virtual grid performance. So I think this might be a common experience for musicians working right now because for health reasons, it's hard to come together as you traditionally would to rehearse and perform. Bill or Gabe, would you speak a little bit about recording yourself remotely, how that works, how these grid performances come together?
Okay. Well, they come together in a lot of different ways. I've been part of my work in the past couple of years has involved home recording, sort of away from pandemic life. So I was a little comfortable with the audio aspect of recording, but depending on the project that you're doing, you might have different parameters of, visual instructions that you might have, and also audio instructions and what people expect in formats and all those kinds of things. So you have a lot of different moving parts to assemble, and you have a lot more jobs besides being a musician. So that definitely offers its own challenges. A lot of us have had to take crash courses in technology, but for this program with the Virtuosi, we were really lucky to be able to work with a producer through like a wired internet connection. So we were able to have live feedback on our audio. So we were able to really capture something that felt, I think, cohesive, because when you're able to bring in a producer early on in the project, he was able to control a lot of our different parameters, and then later on that made it a lot easier to create something that really came across as much more effortless than it was.
Yeah, it really comes off as seamless. And so for viewers at home, it's clear that you're not all in the same room, but that the kind of cohesion that you achieve is pretty remarkable. Bill, what's that like for you? And is it rewarding to see the final product after you've kind of been doing this, remotely?
Absolutely. After we finished doing the recording, I couldn't wait to see what it all looked like, just because it was like the first time I ever did something like that. I mean, I've done recorded things before, and I've done, recording projects like normal recording projects, but this one was to know what was going into it, and knowing how, it was interesting too, because when we were doing some of the recordings, the playback in our ears that we were playing along to was of a live performance that I performed in. So it was kind of a surreal experience to be playing on top of something I had already done. And it was, I don't know if Gabe and Melissa, if you could relate to this, but the weird sort of dichotomy of like balancing the desire to have a life-filled electric performance on stage with an audience in front of you, and just like you go out there, you roll up on stage and you just play, and then you leave, and that's it, and then there's applause and excitement and all of that, and then switching gears to feeling like you have to nail it, and you get it multiple takes, but every single time you're aiming for perfection. Usually when we go out on stage, the big Sphinx Virtuosi Carnegie Hall Gala, we're not necessarily aiming for perfection. We're aiming to make magic happen. We're aiming to like have a fun performance. But it's strange to go into a recording studio knowing that like, okay, I'm here for one reason, and one reason only, just to like nail this. And it's a weird shift, playing on top of something that was part of that electric magic, and then having to be perfect on top of it. It was an interesting experience, I'd say.
It's true. I share that with you, Bill. I got nervous when it was my time. So since we were a producer, we had time slots when it was our time to record. And so when my time slot came, I was nervous. And luckily, our friend was the producer. So it turned out to be completely fine. But I felt the same way.
Yeah, it's really tough.
Yeah. And then also, since it was in our homes, but such a high quality, he could pick up in the microphone any sort of buzz in our house. So I personally had to turn my refrigerator off, because I had to unplug it, actually. I couldn't. He helped me try to turn it off. It wouldn't go off. I unplugged my fridge. It was a really hot day. I had to turn my AC off. It was challenging, but worth it.
So just along these lines, I know this has been a really rough year for musicians and people who are used to performing for a living. How are you all doing? How are you figuring out how to make things work this year?
I would love to hear Gabe and Melissa's answers to this, just because this is how I've been interacting with people, like sitting at my computer through Zoom and stuff. And so it's been very limited. Typically, you go on orchestra tours or you're with a bunch of musicians and you get to really talk about, life and heavy stuff, and you get to know what's going on in people's lives just, off the cuff. And it's not always so intentional. And for me, I've talked about this a couple times, but I don't know if with you two, that I feel like a lot of musicians and artists in general, especially at the beginning in April of the 2020, had to, or I will speak for myself. I was like looking at my instrument and really asking it, like, what are you doing for me? What have you done for me? What am I doing for you? And like this idea, like, are you really just here to put a roof over my head? Am I doing this to make money? What is going on? And the reckoning was really realized like months later when I realized like I couldn't spend more than 2 days ever just not playing at all. Like I had no concerts, I had no auditions, I had no tangible goals, but I could not play. It just made me feel like sick, even if it was just playing open strings or a scale or anything. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I must be like conditioned, like my well-being is conditioned to be alongside like how in tune my instrument is or something. But it made me, I think a lot of musicians had like a self-reflection moment where we had to address like what's going on. Like, are you serving me or am I serving you? Or are we in this together? And yeah, it was heavy to say the least. I don't know about you guys, but that's what I went through.
I mean, it remains heavy, right? We're not done. So, like, and it is funny to hear you say that, because I think that I might also be conditioned to associate part of my well-being with regular playing of an instrument, and I feel like a physical response in my hands if I haven't played the cello in, if I take more than 2 days off or something, and it starts, you start to feel pretty bad. But that also comes at odds with just the natural struggle of your career in the ways that you're used to making money. And I've been lucky to have been able to take some of the time to think about some of the projects that I am most interested in and some of the music that I'm most interested in. And because I was already all set to go with recording myself from home when everything started, I had a maybe more seamless transition to picking up those kinds of gigs than other people, since I already had that capability. But, it's still hard. Nothing is perfect. I live in New York City, and here there are occasional opportunities for groups of people to get together and make a recording, usually a video recording. And I've been able to do a couple of those here and there, but that's also difficult to plan because, there are public health concerns with that too. And, it's an ongoing process. Every month, every week is a little bit different, for me at least.
And I share the same sentiment with both of you guys. It's been a challenging time, and it's also been, I think, a time for us to think about what it is we want to share and what we feel like we need to share versus what we've sort of just been sharing because we do need to pay our rent or we do need to eat. And now when that was stripped away, for me, it sort of brought things back to the basics. And so there was at the beginning, I went a while without playing because it was looking at your books and not knowing when something would come up again. It was devastating. And I think it made me even more sad to play the violin because it just felt like, oh, this is super sad. I'm playing the violin, but when will I actually ever perform? And not that I needed to do it for other people to make it worth it, but just because what we do, we share it, sharing it is part of what brings us joy. So that was difficult. I had some some residencies in the spring that turned virtual since they were with universities. They were also figuring out how to adjust and adapt. So I was lucky to have those things. And then once the summer came, a lot of the teaching things I was going to be doing in person turned virtual. And so I found that my schedule started to fill more with teaching and doing that virtually. And then I joined the faculty at NYU. And so I started having students regularly this past fall, which I was grateful for. And honestly, it was very inspiring to work with students because I feel like the shift they made and the way they were able to continue on with being inspired and like they just kept doing what they did, because they needed full credit, but just, they just kept going. And I was like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. We just keep going. So, it was like a roller coaster of emotions and feelings and figuring things out.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing so much about that. I think I think it's been a real reckoning for the arts, and whether you're a performer or an administrator, we've never experienced en masse this kind of just stop to what we do, and it is really scary. And also, it's offered some opportunity for reflection that isn't always there. And I'm seeing some really incredibly creative artistic endeavors that are coming out of this period, and people creating for the digital frame. And we'll see if some of that continues, but hopefully we'll resume live performance sometime soonish. So I wanted to get in a little bit to some of the music that is part of This Is America. And I haven't had a chance to say to y'all yet, it's just such a wonderful presentation. I enjoyed every moment of it. We had a lot of listeners. We had a lot of people who viewed the presentation during the streaming period here at UMS. And we've had so many great comments from people who watched it. So thanks for taking a little bit of time to talk about it. And of course, you begin the presentation with an arrangement of Lift Every Voice and Sing. And many people know that Lift Every Voice and Sing is also known as the Black National Anthem. This particular arrangement is really cool and sort of takes it into new territory, at least new for me. But I wanted to ask a little bit, national anthems have a lot of meaning, and in the last few years, they've taken on even more meaning, as obviously athletes and other people have chosen to use the anthem as a moment of protest. Every Voice, or Lift Every Voice, is an anthem that speaks volumes. And I wondered if anyone would speak to Lift Every Voice. Does it hold any special meaning for you? What is it like to perform Lift Every Voice for audiences? What's the response? I'd love to hear if any of you have anything to say on that subject.
I don't mind starting. I love Lift Every Voice. I remember when I was in the second grade, we had one of our second grade teachers had us all memorize the words for Black History Month, and then we performed it. And I remember back then, I'm not a singer, but I remember feeling like my classmates weren't doing it justice. I was like, it's so beautiful, you guys, sing the right notes. But this was the second grade me. Anyways, so I really enjoyed Xavier's arrangement, and I was excited that this was a commission for our project as the Virtuosi this year. I thought that it was nice the way he took it through lots of turns, as you said, because the thing about the anthem is I feel like it came from a place of going through challenges and taking turns and continuing to keep hope alive, right? That's what it's ultimately about. And so I feel like he did a nice job of accentuating that type of path and journey and keeping the hope. And then also you were talking about how, athletes and whatnot, they've used it as a sort of way to demonstrate and to sort of share our struggle and bring light to the justice that we're fighting for. And a colleague of ours, a friend Anthony McGill, actually started a hashtag #TakeTwoKnees during the summer after the George Floyd incident, feeling like one knee apparently wasn't enough. And so as musicians, we were hosting musical selections or something that we wanted to, and with the hashtag of #TakeTwoKnees, and actually Lift Every Voice was what came to me. And so that was my musical post for that hashtag. So then when I saw it in the program, it really resonated and it felt nice to do it again.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you. There's another incredible piece, and actually, did any of Bill or Gabe, did you want to speak to Lift Every Voice? I didn't give you a chance to respond.
I mean, I can't really add much to that. I've actually never performed Lift Every Voice for an audience, so but I love the arrangement, and it does a really great job, just as Melissa said.
Yeah, same for me. It's just really great to have relatable music to both perform, and it must be great for we're trying to achieve a goal of having stages reflective of their communities, and having a community, having music that can actually invite certain communities to participate as audience members is really important. So having a young Black composer composing that arrangement definitely leaves room for the audience to be welcome and inclusive in our performance. So I loved it.
Great. I was really taken by Jessie Montgomery's source code. And for anyone who's not familiar with Jessie Montgomery, I think she's one of the really most talented, most interesting composers working today. She's just phenomenal. And I know she's also a Sphinx alumna. And she talks a little bit in the program notes for source code about how she originally conceived of this work. And she began with transcriptions of works by various African-American artists who were prominent during the Civil Rights era. So she talks about Alvin Ailey, Langston Hughes, Ella Fitzgerald, and others. And as she was listening to their work and listening to these transcriptions, she found that the Black spiritual was kind of a common ground and a common musical source across these different genres that the artists were working in. It really struck me because in this program, This Is America, there are quite a few works that draw on spirituals or folk songs. And that's a great tradition in classical music, Western classical music. There's a lot of music that is based on folk tunes. And I'm wondering if one of you would speak a little bit about how and why you think folk music becomes a part of classical orchestral compositions. What is it about those songs that become the basis of orchestral works?
I think it's an interesting through line, like you said, because things like that are very common across what we play as canon. I think that in my experience working with composers, they're often not able to shut out their influences in different ways. So even if things aren't directly quoted, I think something that maybe Jessie was getting at in her research before writing source code is that these, what she was transcribing, they all came from a similar place, and that was just part of their background and part of their world, and that world is always going to come through in the work. And similarly, then that stuff became part of Jessie's world, and that is going to be communicated. It's not necessarily just that we're looking for something that seems less fussy or something to put into this work, but I think that often people just can't help it, because if you've got different kinds of music that have just been living in your head forever, it's going to come out in some way or another. That's at least what I've been starting to notice.
Great. I'm still thinking about source code, and there are a couple of other selections in the program that fall into this category as well. And those were archival performances of live performances of Sphinx Virtuosi. And those who watch the program will notice that there's no conductor. And Sphinx Virtuosi is an ensemble that performs without a conductor. Many people are used to seeing orchestras, even chamber orchestras, performing with somebody on a podium. And so I'm wondering if, Bill, maybe you could speak to this. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to work in an ensemble without a conductor, how you communicate, how you rehearse, what's the process that leads you to a performance?
It's very empowering. It's not that we are unled, it's that we are all leaders. So everyone, I don't think the term we use is unconducted, it's that we are self-conducted. And it's incredibly difficult. And the music you hear, you can tell that it's not always the most straightforward. Not everything's in 4/4. And so sometimes source code in particular was a difficult piece to put together. And it doesn't sound as dense, but because the entrances are so asymmetrical and not so uniform, it's really important for all the performers to come incredibly prepared. And so whenever you're doing something like that, and chamber musicians can relate to this really easily, that you really need to know everybody else's part just as intimately as you know your own. And being inside someone else's part while you're playing yours allows, and when everybody is doing that at the same time, it's almost like you're reading off of somebody else's page while they're reading off of yours, and ensuring this like multiple layers of accountability. And so the most important part obviously is the preparation. And it's a great time. We only get a week to prepare the tours, and it's a fun-filled and rehearsal-filled week in Miami. And the first performance is always at the New World Symphony, at the New World Center, after a couple of days of crammed rehearsals. The best part about it and the worst part about it is that it's just a lot of work to delegate the instruction and the who's rehearsing what and who's leading, who's not leading, who's listening, who's following. And there's like this feeling that every single person has to buy into it in order for it to work. If one person is checked out or not really giving their all, you can sense it throughout the entire group, more so than any other group you'd be in, because we're all really depending on each other. So it's a beautiful thing. It's amazing, but it's really difficult. I could say that.
And how does it compare for you, Gabe? How does it compare for you performing with Sphinx Virtuosi versus a traditional orchestra where there's a conductor?
Yeah, I think it's just an expanded chamber group, essentially. It requires a different kind of communication and a different kind of awareness. In a traditional orchestra, you might just be making sure that you're sort of together with the person next to you, and that you've got an eye on the conductor, and that you've sort of put everything in its right box. But you have to be in a lot more constant communication with just people in general, beyond just having a sort of heightened awareness of what's happening in the group. It can also make for a kind of performance that has really sort of spontaneous and very committed musical choices, because people are having to commit in real time in large numbers, and they can't just sort of coast on somebody else's energy. You have to bring it all yourself, which makes it particularly exciting, I think.
Yeah, actually, I think it really comes through the screen too. There's a big difference when you see the ensemble, the way that you're working together and communicating with one another, and standing for many of you. It brings a real vibrancy to the experience for the audience as well. I was fascinated and excited to see on the program that there was the quartet or movement from the American Quartet by Dvorak. And immediately following is a really incredible cello solo by Casarrubios. And I was struck by the idea that we have two European composers from different centuries, each writing about an American experience of some kind. Of course, we know Dvorak spent time in America. Spillville, I think, is where he spent time. Casarrubios, if I remember correctly, was actually responding to a much more current event in American history. But it got me to thinking about what makes something sound American. And what does it mean when we have European composers who are in some cases documenting and creating what we then consider to make an American sound or an American experience? I know that's a big one.
I mean, it's perception, right? You know, Aaron Copland sounds like America because we put him in all the commercials where we sold things that were American to people. So now Open Fourth sound American. So, I mean, it's something that we're constantly creating in real time, which is interesting because we actually have a choice in what sounds American by what we choose to bring, which I think is just sort of an open question for us to consider when we choose to make American programs. Dvorak's music sounds American because we put the name on it. When you really think about it, his interpretation of the sounds around him is always going to be, you know, it might be stuff that he wouldn't have heard in his hometown, but honestly, a lot of the folk influenced music that he wrote in Europe sounds quite similar to themes in the American quintet or the quartet. So it really ends up being about perception. I think if he wrote most of the cello concerto here, and we don't put the name American on it, but maybe if we did, we might start to read into it a little bit more. That being said, you know, lived experience is like American. You're American if you're here, you know? So that also adds another thing, like you have an American experience and you write American music because you're here in America.
Yep.
I love that question. I love that idea too, that like what is more uniquely American than someone from outside of America imprinting their experience onto us and having it last for generations. You know, we go to any of our arts or any of our disciplines and they have their roots from somewhere else. So why not celebrate it and really treat it and take ownership of it? Because that's what everything that we, you know, really celebrate is. It comes from somewhere else, and that's what American is.
It's true. And I think also sometimes when you're of a culture, it's harder to reflect on it and see it, you know, you're sort of in it. Whereas someone from another place can come and observe it with fresh eyes. And there's a different experience that comes out of that can be helpful. It's a mirror for us in a certain way. So speaking of American composers, one of the great American composers, Leonard Bernstein, is featured on the program with America from West Side Story, which is one of my favorite musicals, one of the great musicals. But of course, America is a song that actually speaks very deeply to the immigrant experience. It questions the idea of what it means to be American. And this particular arrangement really struck me, struck being the operative word, because you begin this arrangement with some really cool sort of string techniques that we don't always see or hear. So there's clapping, you're hitting the body of the instrument. I wondered if one of you or all of you would talk a little bit about some of the things that you do. They may be obvious to you, but they're sort of cool. And I think not everybody knows how those sounds are made.
Sure. I actually sadly wasn't a part of the Bernstein.
I wasn't either.
Bill, were you a part of the Bernstein?
Yeah, that's all me then. Yeah. What's funny about that one is, there's a lot of extended technique, and anything that is not the bow on the string is deemed extended technique. Maybe pizzicato is traditional technique, but if we're playing behind the bridge, or if we are using it as a percussive instrument, that is extending our abilities beyond what we are traditionally capable of. So there's also a lot of harmonics in that one, artificial harmonics. So that's where you get some of those kinds of bell-like tones. And we were banging on the instrument. I think it started with the bass players hitting the bass every couple bars, and so it obviously plays into what's going on in the musical. And speaking of that, like when we performed that on tour, halfway through the tour, I think we decided to, like, towards the end, because we realized, like, in the actual piece that there's, like, people are, like, shouting and screaming towards the end, and so we started doing that in the concerts, we just started like yelling while we were playing, and like celebratory kind of yelling, and that was incorporated into that. But we did not do that in the recording, and I had to ask, like, are we screaming in this? And if we are, like, how's that gonna go? Like, do you need me to do it at a certain time? It took everything in me to hold it in, because it was my favorite part, because it was an encore piece when we did it in on the tour. So, we would sort of like pretend to leave the stage and be like, nah, let's give it one more. And so we'd do that. And that was always a lot of fun. But yes, that's one that's filled with that kind of stuff. And the, I don't know if on this program there was the other piece by Xavier, the 400 years piece, but that was one where we actually had to sing as well. So he asked us to sing, and there's like some quotes of the Pledge of Allegiance and that. So, more and more as music is trying to become more provocative and more instructive and communicative, we end up having to do things that are beyond the bounds of what what Mozart was intending for us to play, which I think is good, because we're communicators, and I think, trying to push the limits of what we can play on our instruments is important. We shouldn't get comfortable. So I enjoy doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I think also when it's a string ensemble, so let's see, West Side Story was written for kind of a pit orchestra to go with a musical. It's been arranged for full orchestra. But when it's a string orchestra, it's also, for the arranger, a really innovative way to bring in some of the sounds that you would hear if you had a full percussion section or brass. It sort of adds more dimension to that string sound, which is really exciting, fun for audiences. And Bill, you've talked a little bit about the tour, the Sphinx Virtuosi tour, and sort of the experience rehearsing together. You just talked a little bit about encores, and I'd be curious to hear from any of you about what it's like to be on tour. How do audiences respond to your performances, and what kind of energy is in the room when you're performing in a live setting?
For me, at least, the Sphinx Virtuosi tours have been some of my most fun musical experiences. The thing is, we're on the road for a while together. It's usually about 4 to 6 weeks. The tour has grown over the years, how long it lasts. But over that amount of time, the bonds grow, and you become good friends off stage, and you start to have your moments on stage that are so special, like we were mentioning in the beginning. And since it's individually led, everyone is committed, like we've been talking about, and you feel that from each other. And so, the night before, we were in some small town, and we made up how we were going to have fun because everything was closed. And then the next day, you have rehearsal in the afternoon for the concert that evening, and you're bringing all of these stories that you're gaining over time together to the stage, and then you're putting it to the music. And everyone's parts are just laid out on the stage, and the audience really feels that. So we get great receptions from the audience. And I remember one time I was on a tour. I don't know if you were on this tour, Gabe, but we were in a town, and there was a terrible snowstorm, and they didn't cancel the show. They really didn't want to. Didn't. I think there were maybe like 10 or 12 people in the audience, and they felt so badly. And listen, we're our own party. We're our own party. So we're like, it doesn't really matter. Like, we're just going to do what we do. And so it was kind of funny because there were more of us on stage than there were in the audience. However, Felicia Rashad was in the audience. And so we were so stoked. We all got to meet her, and it was a great time. So every concert has its own story, and it's always a wonderful experience.
That's great. I love Felicia Rashad. We were talking a little bit before about these different techniques that are used in the Leonard Bernstein. And in the final piece on the program by Michael Abels, which is called Delights and Dances, it really weaves in a lot of different musical styles. So you hear elements of blues, the sort of syncopated rhythms of jazz. You hear there's a movement that's actually called bluegrass. And these are all obviously American forms that Michael Abels has used in this piece. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about versatility as a musician, and the different sort of beyond the kind of classical, Western classical tradition. all the things that are required of you to be a musician today, both in terms of familiarity with different kinds of music, or at least the ability to read rhythms that imitate different styles of music. You talked a little bit about a piece where you were required to sing, some extended techniques on your instrument, and also what you're doing right now, which is talking about what you do. So I know that the role of musicians has really grown over the years and expectations, and I would just love to hear from each of you about your own experience and maybe something that's been required of you, or you had to learn a new skill or sort of step out of your comfort zone.
Who wants to start?
I'm going to call
You go first.
I'll go first.
Okay, go for it.
Outside of my comfort zone when we started having to do virtual recordings at home. I'm the farthest from a tech person. Okay, maybe not the farthest. I help my mom with stuff. But other than that, like, I'm pretty far from tech. And so when we received the Google document about what we needed to do for our setup to record, let's say, for this Virtuosi experience, I didn't even know some of the words, and I Googled them, but I didn't think the definition was right. Like, I knew nothing. And so having to find out the microphone, I thought I had the right mic 2 days before I had to get sent a mic. So, recording has stretched me in a way that's made me question if this is how it is in the future. Like, do I want to be a part of it? Because that part is not fun, for me at least. But I will say that, again, it's the community we share that's made me persevere. And everyone, like, we had a Zoom call to talk about everything and how it was going to go down. And so everyone jumping in, people who are close by, they're like, Melissa, if I wear a mask, I can come look at your setup and make sure it's fine. It's so wonderful. Like, it really has been a beautiful experience to see how we want each other to succeed and keep going and make it through. So I will say, for me, that's been the biggest stretch. But you're right. Ever since Sphinx started, even, I remember starting to do student shows and starting to do concerts where I would interact with the audience and speak from the stage. And so it's kind of just always been a part of performing, that there's another element, like getting to know the audience, getting to share verbally what we do musically, and trying to make the experience a well-rounded experience.
Anyone else want to tackle this question?
Sure. I mean, Melissa's right. Like, there's a lot. People have gotten a lot more comfortable over the years. I actually think that since Melissa and I were students, people learn a lot more about speaking from stage. They learn a lot more about presenting something in a really well-rounded way than we might have seen when we were in school. I'd say also that there are just a lot more left turns that tend to happen in the life of a professional musician than anyone's ready for. So I think that there's just this attitude of, if you're game for something, even if you don't know if you're going to be good at it, that probably will be very helpful in the long run. I'm thinking, in my own life, I definitely had a very traditional musical education and have found myself in situations where I've had to improvise in different styles, when I've had to sing on stage, when I've had to, do a whole bunch of things that if you had asked me 10 years ago, like, can you do this? I would have said no, but I've actually learned that to say no, I can't do that, is not necessarily the right answer. If you can do sort of 70% of that job, it was the same when I started to record myself at home. Like, I understood the principles. How hard could it be? Much harder than I thought it was, but that's besides the point. Like, you just sort of have to be ready to jump in and to learn new skills, because that versatility is always going to bear out for you in the future.
Yeah, I'll speak a little bit on that. I mean, seconding what both of them said, the pandemic has ushered in a lot of new challenges for people to be faced with, and it's been sink or swim for a lot of people. And public speaking is another really unappreciated and under-taught skill that is really necessary to survive. Like, I don't think we're in a classical music. This tradition is, rooted in ancient traditions, like by today's standards, like the way that things evolve. If you have a 3-year-old iPhone, you're out of date. Like 300-year-old compositions are still being performed and traditions are still being seen. So it's hard for that foresight and to be looking ahead that far ahead to make that its way into our education and conservatory institutions. And I think that it's really about time they start teaching, how to do recording setups, how to be implementing sort of public speaking skills. Like I get really nervous. I've taken beta blockers more often for public speaking than I have for any auditions or performance experiences. So that's a little bit maybe TMI. But the one performance, the thing that I always bring up when people are talking about comfort zone is I got asked by a friend in my area. I live in the DC area, and I, would just read chamber music with people, and how people kind of get to know you, and they recommend you to people, and like, hey, do you want to read some jazz music with us? And I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And now I play in this like jazz, funk, tango, fusion kind of ensemble. It's got a string quartet, and it also has like a rhythm and percussion and accordionist. And it's kind of embarrassing to be a part of it because I have music on my stand that I play, which is really difficult because it'll be like 11/4, 12/4 bars going back and forth, and it's hard to count. And then all of a sudden the person next to me will just start like flying away, improvising, and I'll have no idea like how long they'll be going for. And I'm just so used to, like we were talking about before, a conductor telling me when to start and stop and knowing exactly, I'll just play what's on the page. Nope. Like they'll be going, and I'll just have to feel when I'm supposed to go back in. And that's out of my comfort zone. But it's it says a lot because we find our comfort zone so quickly, and we only grow when we push those boundaries. And we don't, especially when you're an adult, and especially when you found a way to like not really have to challenge yourself so much, and you think you can get away with it, like you're done. That's when it gets really dangerous. So to admit that like you're never done and you should always be pushing that is when you really are committed to that kind of lifestyle and that artistic expression. So it's a challenge, but it's one I think a lot of people have to face and learn about really early on. And that's also something I don't think is taught really. In school, they give this illusion, and in conservatory, they give the illusion like, okay, all you have to do is learn 3 octaves and then you're good to go. Off you go. It's there's so much more to it than that. So.
Well, we're drawing near the end of our time. You guys have been so great and so generous in sharing what's going on in your lives and talking about this program. If we could have a quick lightning round of just one thing you're really looking forward to once the pandemic is over, love to hear from you about that. Could be performance related, doesn't have to be.
I mean, well, 2 things. The first thing that I thought of was I live in New York and my family lives in Chicago, and I haven't seen them in a long time. So I can't wait to get on a plane. It's going to be awesome. But similarly, getting on a plane to leave the country to get paid to play music somewhere. That is going to be awesome.
That sounds good. I actually was just thinking of a dinner party with musicians and like our own sight reading party. Like imagine we come together. So musicians like to have sight reading parties together in someone's living room, and you bring wine. And for some reason, musicians turn out to be really great cooks. I kind of lost that. Although I've been cooking more. Okay, I sidetracked. So I can't wait to go to or have people over to my living room, whatever, and like it's just us. It's a big musical family, and we have really great wine and food and play chamber music together.
Yeah, both of those. I mean, I can't wait to travel internationally again, and I can't wait to have like a group of friends over and have like a dinner party and sight read. I really like the movies, and I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to go to a movie theater again. There's one right across the street from me, and I don't think it's ever going to open up again. And I don't know when I'm going to want to go back in it. So that's something I miss a lot, just seeing movies.
Thank you guys so much. This has been really fun. Thanks for spending an evening and chatting with me. I just want to thank you on behalf of everyone at UMS. And for our audience watching from home, before we finish up, I want to remind you that if you would like to watch this presentation, This is America, it's on the UMS website until midnight tonight, so you have one more chance. We also have a really exciting upcoming digital presentation. It's James Ennis, violinist, with Orion Weiss piano, which is going to be streaming on demand February 14th through 24th. So Bill, Melissa, Gabe, thanks again. And everyone out there, good night.
Thank you. This was
Thank you so much.
Thank you.